Hi, I'm Gene Black. Today I'm going to show you how to make flying geese units 4 at a time, and I'm also going to show you that one thing that you can do with them. So let's look at the board here. This is a flying geese unit, and traditionally it's made with 2 triangles, well 3 triangles, 1 large and 2 small. However, the way we're going to do it is a little different, and it's much easier in my opinion. So let's look at what we need. A 5 1/4 square, and this will be the geese part of the unit. We also need 4 3-inch squares, which will be the corners. On each of these I have drawn a diagonal line from corner to corner, as you can see. That will be our sew a 1/4 inch away seam line. So let's go over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how I sew them, and I'll see you at the machine. Okay, so now we're at the sewing machine, and let me show you how to lay these pieces together so that we can sew them. We want to line this up right in the corner. I want those edges, and I'm sorry this is going to be a little hard to see, those edges lined up with the outside edges of my square. I'm going to take the other one and put it at the other end. I'll slide it out here just to make it easier. Line up those edges, and your line should pretty much line up in a straight line. We have some wiggle room. That's the reason I use the 3-inch squares. And then we're going to sew using that as our 1/4 inch line. So I'm using my 1/4 inch foot, and I'll just sew right along. I'm going a little slow for you. Normally I zip through these pretty fast. Now I'm going to just put my little thread catcher here, zoom right on in, and clip this off. Then I turn my piece around, and I don't have to hold on to it this time because it's sewn together. It's not going anywhere. Slide it back under on the other side of the line and sew right down, using that as my 1/4 inch mark. Put my thread catcher, here it is. Sew right on off. Now if you're doing a bunch of these, you can have a bunch set up and just go from one right on to the other one and sew all of one side, and then turn the thing around and sew all of the other and cut both strings at one time. Okay. Once I've got this done, I take my scissors because it's easier. You could do it with your rotary cutter if you wish, but I just cut it right along this line. And honestly, I mark these with an ink pen, so they would show up better on camera, but it's going to be in the seam allowance and it's never going to be a problem. Okay, once I get these open, cut apart, I need to press them open. And I can do this right here with my fingernail. If I'm doing a lot of them, I carry them to the ironing board, but I sew a lot of them first, so I don't have to run back and forth. Once I get that pressed reasonably well, I take another square that's exactly the same as the first two. It's our 3-inch square. Lay it in here, again, aligning the edges. That corner's going to run off just a little bit. That's just great. Gives me a little starting point. I put it under the foot, and that's catching, you see. I'll just lift that. And I'm doing the exact same process that we did on the first section. I sew to the end. Once I've sewn off, I can just raise my needle, pull it out, and go back down the other side. You can do that with the other also if you're only making 4. I highly recommend chain piecing them though. just cut it off. You can see my little tails. Thread catcher tail is still there, and I'm just going to put it back and put my needle down. Now, with this unit, we just cut again on the line. And it's a little thick right here, by the way, because you have several pieces of fabric overlapping. Cut through, and we end up with our goose unit. I need to take these to the ironing board and press them, and then we'll be back. But the other piece, you would do the same thing. Press that open, put the piece in. It's identical to what I've just done here. So I'm going to press these, and I will meet you in a moment. At this point, I have my Flying Geese units pressed, and I'm ready to start trimming them. This is part of the process to make them perfect. So let's go to the table and let me show you the ruler. On my ruler, I have used some neon ruler tape from some company to mark my lines. I am just outside the 4.5 and just outside the 2.5 lines. I don't want it right on them because I need to see those lines. You can use masking tape, painter's tape, whatever works for you. I've also marked this little point right here, and when I put it on the unit, I will explain what that is. You need to be at the corner where your diagonal line goes across. I just knock that off, and I'll just put it right back on. Okay, now, so here's our unit, and let's just put it here with the ruler. I am going to put the diagonal line right on the seam line. I want this point to be exactly on the point of the Flying Geese unit, and it is. So at this point, I'm ready to trim. I can check these lines and make sure my 4.5 and 2.5 are not being cut off, because I might fudge the unit if it didn't fit perfectly, but these usually do. So I cut off this side, and I cut off this side. Get those out of there. Then I turn the unit around. This time I'm going to line up my 4.5 line here and my 2.5 line here, exactly with the outside edges. And let's get it perfect, because when we do the 2 1/4 line here, that's 1/4 inch from the edge, will also match that point, and our unit will be perfect. Trim that side, then we trim that side. Occasionally it doesn't trim all the way through. I'm using an old cutting mat, but that piece has been stubborn. And we have our perfect unit. Now, we'll take a break and move to the other side, and I will show you how we use this unit to make what I call a Flying Star unit. Some people call it a Sawtooth Star. I think Flying Star sounds better. So, I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so here is the Sawtooth Star, or as I like to call it, the Flying Star, because it's made with 4 flying geese. This is the unit, the entire block that we're making. Using the measurements that I use, it comes out to an 8.5 inch square. So let's look at the pieces. We of course need our 4.5 by 2.5 Flying Geese units. They are the outside edges. We need 4 2.5 whites, or whatever your background color is, squares, for the outer corners. And for the center, we need 1 4.5 inch square. To put this together, let me move my measurements. I take this piece and sew it onto this piece. I have the block laid out right beside my sewing machine, and I move down. It's important to sew this piece with the Flying Geese unit on top. And I will tell you that is a thick seam intersection. Your machine may make a little clunk sound when the needle goes through. But you want to sew the 1/4 inch, and when you get here, you can't really see it on this, I don't think, but you want to sew just outside those 2 seam lines, just barely. You may have to wiggle it just a little bit to get that, and then sew off your 1/4 inch off that edge. Then I take this one and sew it. Once I've sewn all of those, I just move to the other side and sew this to this, this to this, and this to this. When I have 3 of, then I go and press them. Now, when I press this, I always press toward the outer edges on this one and toward the inner edge on this one, so that I'm not trying to mash that point. It leaves that laying nice and flat and makes it less bulky seam actually once you go to quilt it. Once you've done that, your seams will nest, because these will be one way, these the other, and this will be the same as this one. So you don't have to remember different seam ironings for these 2. They both go toward the outside. These both go toward the inside. Then, when you've got that together, you're going to take this row, which will all be 1 at the time, and sew it together. You want to nest those seams and pin. I rarely pin, but this is one place that I pin. I want to pin right on the sewing line. I can sew right up to my pin, and it's going to catch the seam allowance on one side. Pull the pin out and keep sewing. Again, make sure when you get here to sew so you don't cut off the point of your Flying Geese unit. When you get over here, and I pin both of these before I start, you'll have this one pinned the same way you pinned this one, and then you will repeat it for the other end. It's really simple, and as you can see, it makes a beautiful block. Then when you go to the ironing board and iron it out, notice I've got all of these going to the inside, to this blank solid piece of fabric. That way I have less bulk in the seams. It works out very well this way. And that's how I make the Flying Star. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. And I hope you enjoy making some flying geese 4 at a time. And maybe you'll try the Flying Geese Star. Thank you.